Hi, DeDe and Heather. We are so excited to have you to our virtual stage for WTF. I want to just take a minute to introduce you guys, even though, I feel like you don't really need much introduction. DeDe Leah is the Executive VP, Global Public Policy and Government Relations at ViacomCBS. And Heather Podesta is founder and CEO of Invariant. And both of these women have really navigated the Washington landscape for years. And all of us are kind of very interested to hear what you have to say because we have so many questions about, what's going to happen. So thank you again for joining us. I really appreciate it. I guess we should just jump right into the big topic at hand, which is the election. And I'd be really interested kind of from both your perspectives, DeDe from the media landscape and Heather from the tech landscape, what are clients most worried about regarding the upcoming election?
I'll start with that. I don't know that there's anything per se we're worried about in terms of the election and who will win and what a new or current administration might do in the second term. I think my job is to just be prepared for whatever comes our way and to focus, now in terms of getting ready with the possible transition team or the existing team. So I can't say we're worried. What we will do is watch for certain things, right? Vice President Biden has already said he wants to roll back the business tax cuts that the Trump administration did. So that's something that we have to focus on and look at. Obviously, currently with the Trump administration, we will be looking at our relationship with China. China is a big market for Hollywood, and right now there is some tension there between the two countries, and that is impacting us. So that's something we would look at. So I won't say we're worried because we have to work with whoever wins, but we're mindful and we're just paying attention to what's going on.
With regard to that, are there things that you can do now before the election to kind of plan for either scenario?
Sure. And we are planning now and we're looking at, what would we think Biden might look at should he win? Where we think Trump would go should he win? You talk to the transition team members to see what the administration might be looking at. So we plan now. We'll look at who our consultants are to make sure we have the right people in place to help us as we go forward, working with our trade associations. First term, second term of presidents isn't always the same. They may look at some different areas. They may look at the same areas. So you start your cadence now. You don't wait until January 21st. We started this candidly over the summer. I had my team to, sort of begin to look at what do we think Biden might consider. But again, until someone gets in office and depending on what's going on at the time, you can plan because you need a plan, but it just may not work, right? Frankly, I think any administration, whether it's a Biden administration or the current Trump administration, has to focus on COVID. That is priority 1, 2, and 3 for me from a business perspective. We have to get the country healthy. We have to get the economy healthy. Everything flows from that. So whatever they may want to do starting next year, we've got to focus on that first from my perspective.
Absolutely. Heather, what are you hearing from clients on the tech side?
So in Washington, you have to understand that we live in a world where all of us are on a roller coaster during an earthquake, it's hailing, and they're calling for tornadoes, and the cross restraint just broke. And so for us, every day is a month. And while we can plan for a Biden presidency or 4 more years of Trump, there's so much in front of us before Election Day, which will dramatically change and impact that which we're doing in the winter. I agree with DeDe that the focus is going to remain on COVID and stabilizing the economy and do no further damage, but figure out how to get people back to work, make sure that folks are getting healthcare, that they're getting the right equipment, that people are supported during this really rough and hard time. So in terms of our tech clients, they're interested in antitrust enforcement. They're interested in privacy legislation. They're interested in Section 230 and what that looks like. But all of these issues are going to take a back seat to the very real situation that we all find ourselves in.
I want to just go back to one thing that DeDe mentioned, which is the relationship with China. I mean, can you talk a little bit about how you can prepare for either administration with regard to that relationship and what it could mean for big tech?
So this is an area where everyone's going through their own soul searching and understanding and, you know, how to mitigate risk. Clearly, this administration challenged not just tech companies, but all tech companies in terms of supply chain. And one effort, which is bipartisan, is how do we reshore our supply chain? And you're seeing that energy across the political spectrum when it comes to the semiconductor industry and wanting to put real money and advance a national policy on those matters.
Right, exactly. You also mentioned Section 230, which is the Communication Decency Act, which protects companies from liability for content they post. DeDe, I'm interested from your perspective. I mean, obviously, the platforms have a stake in this fight, but I'm interested, do big media companies also have a stake in this?
You know, we're watching it. We haven't really spent a lot of, I would say, lobbying power on it, but we are watching it. You know, there has been a change in Washington, candidly, over the years about how the tech companies are viewed. I think a bit of the halo is off. I think a bit of the glow is off, and that's why people are looking at 230 now. This was unthinkable just a few years ago, right? It was unthinkable for anyone to question the tech shield, you know, the liability shield that they have. So it's not an issue that as a company we're actively lobbying on, but we are watching it. And we do want to make sure that whatever happens with the tech companies, people understand that we are still working with them to make sure that our intellectual property is protected. And whatever happens with 230, and if you get rid of that shield, or however they reformulate, if they reformulate, protecting our intellectual property and piracy and copyright is our number one priority vis-a-vis the tech companies. If 230 helps us to do that, then great. But we have to work in an environment, you know, whether we have 230 or not. But I will say that just overall, the glow is off a bit over these past, you know, from years ago when we worked on SOPA PIPO, which people will remember. And I think people are now willing to have that conversation about the responsibility of the tech companies in a way that they just weren't ready before.
Legislating is hard and it takes time. And we have all seen bills languish for years and for Congresses. And something like Section 230 is hard. And it requires members of Congress to pick winners and losers, which they really do not like to do. And so might we see some very narrow tailoring of the legislation? I think that's possible. We've seen it before, but sort of wholesale changes, highly unlikely. Even if you were to have Democrats sweep everything with massive majorities, you're not going to see the removal of that protection.
Interesting. Which of the big tech companies do you think is most likely to be regulated?
I think it's the same tech companies that Trump has focused on. So it is Google, it is Facebook, and it is Amazon. And so, should there be a Biden administration, one of the first things they're going to have to decide on the Google front is what to do with the expected lawsuit that's going to be filed this fall. In terms of Facebook, FTC and the career officials have started their inquiry, and that will continue on. I think the big question is Amazon and where the regulators go there. I think that COVID has accelerated certain harms to small businesses and to Main Street, and people will be interested in understanding Amazon's role in the acceleration of that decline, and what that looks like, I think will be a priority for either candidate for president.
I think Heather's right. I mean, the House Judiciary Antitrust Subcommittee looked at these same companies. They're working on a blueprint that I think could be used by a future Biden administration or an existing Trump administration. So I think Heather's right. It's probably those three companies, but I go back to what I said earlier. In my opinion, whatever an administration has to do first before they can go on to any of these other issues, we have to deal with COVID. We, as a business, and from the business perspective, it is hard to move forward as much as we try. And we're all, we're working to get our company back to production, and we are producing, and everyone back to the workplace. So all of that will happen, but I don't think in the first few months of next year, you're going to see anything other than COVID.
Right. Yes, I hope that's true. You have both been in Washington for a while, and I'd be interested in just kind of how has lobbying for tech and media changed over the past 4 years under the Trump administration? And are there things that you think will last, like changes you've seen that you think will last beyond this administration?
Well, now we can have a policy change made with less than 280 characters. That the sort of craziness and erraticness of this administration has required all of us to tune up our game in a different way. I will say the C-suite has had to focus how its actions are going to be viewed by the conservative media. So given that the president, the decider-in-chief, is an active, voracious, very interested in that which Fox and other conservative outlets is saying, that part of a lobbying strategy now is how to get it right in those forums. Never before have we huddled with a client to figure out what our tweet strategy is, how to lobby the president to tweet on a particular topic. But, certain parts of politics will always remain the same, which is who's close to the president. How do we get that person either publicly or privately to weigh in with the president? I think, a Biden presidency would be very different. I'm here to tell you that it will feel dull and boring. The media companies will hate it. Because a lot of the clickbait that we've all experienced will dissipate, that will go back to rule of law, process. And so instead of every day being an episode of Survivor, we're going to go back to a situation where it's going to feel like C-SPAN reruns. I am so excited at the thought of not hearing our president's voice each day, possibly not in a week and maybe even a month. And so, I do think that there are different ways in which you lobby this White House, but I think, you know, I'm happy either way, but I'd like a little more C-SPAN rerun.
Huh. You know, I would say as a media company, we haven't, at least I haven't, and we haven't spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to influence Fox News. We don't care. We're CBS News and we're MTV and we're BET and Nickelodeon, so we don't care. You know, not that much has changed in the way that I lobby, only because, and Heather's, I think your second point, at least as it relates to Viacom, is where we are. The pendulum always swings. And I've been doing this long enough that I see the pendulum swing. And the most important thing for me to do for our company is to be sure that we're ready, whichever way the pendulum decides to swing. So I was here in the Republican takeover in the 90s and here when the Democrats, you just have to be ready. And, you know, at the end of the day, you have to stick to your core principles. You know, you may change some things in the margins, but at the end of the day, it's your reputation. You know, say what you do what you say. Don't ignore Congress. And I think a lot of people may have done that, and that's not the smart thing to do. But, you know, administrations come and go, and you just have to be ready for whoever's going to be in the White House.
In Washington, you can never have too many friends, and they should be across the political spectrum. And, you know, the thing you learn very early on in politics is that your intern today will be
chief of staff.
Chief of staff to the president.
Exactly.
Next year, so.
Exactly. And that has happened on more than one occasion. Yeah.
To that point, I'm kind of curious. I mean, because it does feel like everything is so polarized right now, is there going to be kind of, obviously COVID is a huge focus, but is there also going to have to be like a kind of coming together or like reassessing each other in Washington? Because we're going to, you know, it can't continue to be this polarized. I mean, is that something?
I hope so. I mean, it is, I will say it is draining to have to think about some of these things in a way that you may not have had to before. It is draining. So I do hope that we'll get more of the bipartisanship, more of the working together for the good of the country, less of the finger pointing. You know, I remember a member of Congress sitting a group of us down and a senator, and what do you need? I said, we need this to stop. You know, CEOs I don't get to do this in my company, right? You figure out the solution, you present it, and then you move on. No company can survive continual finger pointing. I don't care where it comes from. So I do hope that we can come to some resolution on some of these important issues.
Can you guys talk a little bit about how it's been to be a woman in politics over time, but particularly perhaps over the past 4 years?
Oh, it's always good to be a nasty woman. Oh. Or to nevertheless persist. I think we're really fortunate in Washington in terms of having great role models, Speaker Pelosi being truly extraordinary. She is smart, she is tough, she knows people, she is a really good girl. She has a core sense of right and wrong, and, you know, does it with such amazing grace and force and just gets shit done. And the girl can rock a face mask like nobody else. And so, you know, even in sort of this Me Too time, we've got strong women like Pelosi, like Kamala Harris, and others that really give us strength. The other thing that I will say, Jessica, is the network of support that women have for one another in Washington, D.C. is real. And it is a fierce and powerful sisterhood. And that, I think, helps you're able to survive and thrive in politics by knowing that people have your back. And DeDe and I have the fortune of being good friends, but also knowing that each one of us will have a bad day. Might be a public bad day, but the sisterhood is always there and helping, sometimes not even saying what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, Heather's right. The sisterhood is fierce, and the sisterhood is real, and it's deep.
Mm-hmm.
And people may not even know that we exist, but people need to know we do exist, and we are paying attention, and we are taking notes, and we will act as needed. So look, it's never easy or been easy necessarily to be a woman in any industry. But the beauty, I think, of the women in Washington is that we also just don't spend time thinking about it. We have so much on our plate. We have so much to do. I cannot do my job and wake up every morning and say, oh my God, I'm a woman and I'm a Black woman, and what's going to happen to me today? If I focus on that, I won't get my job done on behalf of ViacomCBS. But I know it's there, and I just assume that if you don't like me because I'm a woman, if you don't like me because I'm an African-American woman, that's your issue. You've got issues, and you need to go seek help and figure out what your pathological problems are. But it's always been there. It's a constant. But the sisterhood is real, and I think the sisterhood is getting even stronger now than it's been.
There has been one upside to COVID, which is politics is a contact sport. And so there's a lot of touching and feeling and kissing and mush, which I am so happy to have removed from my life. And I think that does impact women differently than men.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point. One question I want to make sure we get in is, if we do see a change in administration, how do you see it affecting the M&A landscape for media and tech?
So,
go ahead. That's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. I expect greater scrutiny across both media and tech. Things will not happen quickly. They will continue at sort of the same steady path. It takes a while for laws to change and for law enforcement to kick in. I think another big change is that the White House is going to be a lot less involved in mergers and acquisitions than the Trump administration. That you are going to see from day one the desire to separate the political from enforcement and to rebuild that wall. So you won't see a President Biden calling for corporate divestments. You won't see him intervening at DOJ on an antitrust case.
I think there will be a review of competition policy, either through Congress or DOJ. But remember, in the Obama White House, we had a Comcast NBCU merger go through. And I believe we also had Charter Time Warner Cable go through, at least in our industry. So I don't think if there's a Biden administration, that means that there won't be mergers approved or anything like that. I think, to Heather's point, there may be more scrutiny. Maybe it'll be different scrutiny, and probably scrutiny that we're more used to, and sort of the normal course of business scrutiny.
Over the past few weeks, we had the situation with TikTok where, all these companies showed up, where it was Microsoft and Oracle and Walmart, not the traditional acquirers. Do you think were you surprised by that? Do you think we're going to see more of that in coming months?
Of the Walmarts and people like that wanting to get
non-traditional, right? I mean, you have to assume that like Facebook, Apple, Google, they can't do these deals anytime soon. So do you think we'll see these other kinds of tech companies or retailers kind of come out of the woodworks for these kinds of assets?
Could be. I mean, if you think about what we're all doing now with COVID and doing more work online, I think it probably makes sense if you're a big box retailer in particular to figure out your online and your digital strategy. I think you have to.
From a Washington perspective, for me, the interesting piece of this is an issue that's not being determined by the market. It's being decided in Washington, D.C. That this is a dramatic shift in terms of how markets work, how rule of law works, how ownership works. And so I think under this administration, could we expect to see another TikTok situation? Absolutely. But I think, if there's a Biden administration, it's sort of like, let the market do what the market is going to do, as opposed to everybody on the TikTok deal is engaged not only in terms of creating the best possible economic deal, but working the deal with the White House. And it is the ultimate lobbying campaign. And what we won't know, not for a while, is you'll have the TikTok deal, but what other deals had to be put together in order for the victor to be the victor?
Interesting. Very interesting. Great. Well, thank you, DeDe and Heather, so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I do want to open this up to some questions from the audience. So let's see what people have to ask.
Sounds good.
Well, great, ladies. I love having you guys together, and I love your banter. It's so fun to watch. We have a few questions. So I think we should just get to them since we don't have a ton of time. I was actually kind of interested to go back to something that you said, DeDe, early on. You said that, you're kind of mapping for everything, right? Like you're not worried about anything, but you've just got to start the mapping process early. What are you mapping out? Like when you're looking at a potential of a Biden administration, maybe could you talk a little bit about like, what are the issues that you're like, this is what we should be on top of if there's an administration change?
Well, I think one of the things you always want to know is who is the new president going to bring into their administration, right? Who will the staff be at the key positions? Obviously everyone's focused at the cabinet level and all of that's important, but who will be the chair of the Federal Communications Commission? Who will be the chair of the Federal Trade Commission? Who will be at DOJ? Who will be heading up the Antitrust Division? Then there's that next layer, right, of people within the West Wing. Who's going to be there? So you'll have an idea. Is it friend? Is it foe? Hopefully they're all friends. So you first really want to figure out how Biden will staff his administration and how the vice president will staff her team as well, because she'll have her own team. So that's one area that you'll look at. Again, as I've said before, I think this administration or any administration has to focus on COVID first before we can get to any of the other issues that we may care about, be it on taxes or on copyright or whatever the issues are. Because until we get us back to some sort of normalcy, I think it's very hard for any industry to focus on anything else. Within COVID, we'll be, continuing our back to workplace, back to production, looking at pandemic risk insurance, production insurance. So there are other areas that we'll be looking at within COVID, but we'll also be wondering who's going to be where. What are the moving chairs? What are the musical chairs? Who's going in? Who's coming out?
Heather, any thoughts on that?
I agree with DeDe. The tagline is personnel is policy. And so it's very telling who gets selected, not only as cabinet officials, but their chiefs of staff and their deputy secretaries. And it's a real indicator in terms of where the administration, a new administration is headed. And I think, should Trump win a second term, we're also looking at new folks in power, that there's been a lot of movement, a lot of positions have not been filled. and what is the next 4 years with a thinly staffed and who comes in. And that absolutely changes the face of government. Clearly, current events are driving the legislative, regulatory, and political agendas, and that isn't going to change anytime soon.
Absolutely. I mean, do you think that if we do have a change in administration, if Biden wins, we will see a more federal response rather than the states, to the COVID situation?
I do. Heather, I don't know what your thoughts are, but I certainly do.
Yeah, I think we're going to have much clearer communication in terms of a plan and making full use of the federal government to make sure that people have access to PPE, that there is, clear method of distributing vaccines, this sort of pushing it down to the states to kind of figure it out on their own. Folks have learned a lot of valuable lessons, but having a centralized system for information, materials, people could be really helpful. And, I anticipate that Biden would absolutely make COVID response priority 1, 2, and 3.
We have a question from Kylie. How do you feel? I think Heather will have some interesting answer to this one. How do you feel the current administration's communications team has handled COVID conversations?
It has been incomplete, inconsistent, intermittent. It has been really hard to watch. And what we've learned over the last 4 years is how powerful the soapbox is that the White House has. The fact that you have the ability as president to set the debate and have a coherent, ongoing messaging. And what we've seen is, head one direction, then head a different direction. Don't wear masks, wear masks, and a lot of confusion and not looking to sort of keep returning to the science and to the facts. And I think, a Biden administration is going to be really boring because it's going to be based on science and facts, and facts are not emotions and they're not feelings, but they are a good tool for making decisions.
Yeah. Facts are a good tool for making decisions. Good answer. So this is a great question from Kate. Looking post-COVID, in terms of legislation prioritization, are U.S. data rights high or low on the federal action list in your mind? In other words, is privacy dead? Will tech lobbyists be successful in taking the teeth out of privacy legislation?
I don't think privacy is dead. I think privacy is one of those evergreen issues that's been around for a minute and will continue to be around. So I think post-COVID, once whatever administration or Congress we have starting in 2021, privacy is not dead. Privacy will continue to be an issue. And I think the next Congress will look at it and the next administration will look at it as well.
It really depends on who wins in November. So if there is a Democratic sweep, if we grow the majority in the House and Democrats take over the Senate and the White House, a big if, I do think privacy gets tackled. It is one of those items that has been out there for several years. There is an appetite to do something on it. And something like privacy could move with one-party control.
I love this question. Just switching topics a bit. Sophie has a question about the Apple Epic lawsuits. And, what do you think they mean? And what does it mean, next for Apple and to some extent Google?
You have two giants fighting it out in the court system. Issues like this, Congress just backs away and leaves it to the two of them to fight it out.
Who are you betting on?
I'm betting on Apple.
Why? Because they're Apple?
Because they're Apple, and the facts are on their side. And I think that Epic has major issues in their suit, but also in an environment in Washington where people are paying a lot of attention to Chinese ownership. The fact that Epic is 40% owned by Tencent is a big deal.
Absolutely. I mean, DeDe, you guys must be, because this has, implications for anyone that's going to try to sell something through Apple, which is every media company. So, I mean, what are you thinking about it?
We have deals with Apple, and we've had a great relationship with them and always have. I think, we're watching it, but I promise you we will not get in between a battle of two Goliaths. We'll just be watching from the sidelines to see what happens. Heather is right. There is this focus in Washington now on China. I think that focus remains regardless of the administration. And I think having a 40% ownership certainly could sway the minds of policymakers. But having said that, as Heather said before, whenever there's a lawsuit, Washington backs away. And I just don't think you'll see anything from a government perspective here. And from the Viacom perspective, it's one that we're watching. But, we do have a relationship with Apple.
So, I mean, you talked a little bit about this, but I do want to go back to China because obviously it's such a topic these days. And you have the situation around TikTok where, who thought that, two world powers would be coming to blows over an app that targets tweens. But I'm just curious from your perspective. I mean, if it is a Biden administration, you don't anticipate things getting better with China?
I think you'll see a continued focus on China. I think the difference may be in the tone and sort of the rhetoric around China. Biden, when he was in Congress, was critical of China and has been critical of China outside of being in Congress and being in the White House. I just think the tone will be different, but I still think that a Biden administration pays attention to what's going on with China, be it, election interference or the trade deficit, trade deals, their relationships with industry. I think the focus is there. I just think it's the mood around how you deal with them.
Okay, great. Well, I know there are other questions, but we have to wrap it up because we have to get to our next speaker. Thank you so much, Heather and DeDe. And I want to
Thank you. Everybody vote. Make a plan to vote and vote.
That's right. Vote only once.
At Intuit, we believe you cannot have prosperity without equality. Women and people of color should not be paid less than men for the same work. 3 years ago, we made a commitment to reach and maintain pay equity for our employees. But pay equity is an ongoing process, and all companies must join this fight. Like the 19th Amendment, we are not done.